In the end, you need to submit the portfolio. You will receive directions from OSSE after the first of the year on the procedure for returning materials and shipping materials and all of that. That is not available at this time. A detailed description of how to prepare student portfolios for shipping and how to compile the binder can be found in Chapter 7 of the Procedures Handbook. Any questions so far? If you do, please use the chat feature, and Bruce will field the questions and we can discuss them.
So far, we haven't had any questions.
Okay. Portfolio components. This is pretty high level. Since many of you who are in attendance have probably developed a portfolio at least 1 year. If you have not, if you are new to the portfolio process, I would refer you back to the new teacher portfolio PowerPoint that was presented this morning but will be available online. Okay, this is an overview of what the DC Science Alt portfolio should look like. At any grade level, you will have 3 entries, each one for each of the 3 strands that are required. Each entry will contain an entry cover sheet and will include 8 to 10 pieces of evidence. And some of you may be thinking, but wait a minute, you just said baseline plus 6 additional pieces of evidence. So let me outline what those pieces of evidence are. Every entry should have a data chart. Every entry should have an activity description. Okay, so there's 2 pieces of evidence. Plus then 6 to 8, at least 6 pieces of evidence that corroborate the data chart. So the dates on your student work evidence will match the dates on the data chart, and that makes you 8 pieces of evidence, plus 2 optional pieces of evidence if you choose. 6 is the minimum number of pieces of student work evidence. 8 is the maximum number of pieces of student work evidence. So that's where we come up with 8 to 10. 1, 2, 2 plus 6 is 8, 8 plus 2 is 10. So 8 to 10 pieces, depending on how many pieces of student work evidence you include. As in past years, student portfolios should be compiled in a standard 3-ring binder. There's a table of contents form that is available in Appendix B of the Procedures Handbook that can be filled out. And then the first section will contain, as in past years, the learner characteristics profile, parent validation form, the administrator validation form, and optionally the permission to photograph or use audio or videotape if, in fact, these kinds of artifacts are included in the binder. The second section will contain your 3 science entries. And these, again, are the 3 grades, grades 5, 8, and then biology at high school level.
Carol?
Talk a little. Yes, sir.
Hey, real quick, can you go back and just clarify again the number of pieces of evidence and how that includes or excludes the baseline?
Certainly. So in addition to a data chart, 6 pieces of corroborating evidence, student work samples, are required for each science strand, okay? Amongst one of the documented pieces of evidence on every data chart is baseline data. This is a data point that is collected typically before instruction begins to see what the student's knowledge level is. It can be used as one of your pieces of evidence, but there should be baseline data for every entry. And then here are student work samples collected over time that support this learning strand and standard and the targeted skill. So when it says 6, that may be a little bit confusing. The total number, the total minimum number is actually 7 pieces of evidence, should be on the data collection chart. You still only need to show documentation for 6 of these data points, a minimum of 6, in your student work evidence. So you may not have presented the student work evidence for the baseline data, but presented all of these pieces. So then here you have 6. You've met your minimum for 6 pieces of student work evidence. It's not that the baseline data doesn't count as a piece of work evidence. It certainly can. But what needs to appear on the data sheet is a baseline, some baseline data, and then an additional 6 data collection points. Of these 7 pieces of information, you need to have student work evidence for in the portfolio for 6 of these entries. Does that help clarify, Bruce?
Yeah, I think it will. Thank you.
Certainly. So in addition to a data chart, 6 pieces of corroborating evidence, and that refers to these 6 outside of the baseline. I think there's something more. I think, yeah. We're going to talk about this in just a second again, too. So anyway, you have your first section, which has those housekeeping kinds of forms, and then the second section will actually be the entries themselves. As we talk about a standard 3-ring binder, this procedure is a little bit different. In the past, Pearson has sent 3-ring binders to the schools based on the student data file. In 2016, the test administrator, whoever your building or your district testing coordinator is, will provide binders in the spring. Also, LEAs are welcome to use any standard binder for portfolio entries. If you have an empty binder in your classroom and you want to start compiling information in that binder for the 2016 the Science Alt, you're welcome to do so. However, I guess I just want to make it clear that Pearson will not be providing those this year. If you are having difficulties locating a binder, contact your LEA, DC Science Alt coordinator for additional binders if you need them. Okay, the rule about not using staple on any of the portfolio entry contents is still in effect. It's easier for scorers to look through the student's evidence if the pages are not stapled together. So if you have a multi-page work sample, you can number them like page 15A, 15B, 15C, so that the scorer knows that all of those pages are connected, but please don't use staples. And that procedure is outlined on page 30 in the Procedures Handbook. If you have questions about binders and how to get them, I would talk to your building test folks, and they will find out where the binders can be obtained. Okay, data collection, the data chart, and the protocol is the same. Collects one data point prior to instruction to establish the baseline or starting point. The baseline data point must be at or below 50%. If your student can achieve 90% on a baseline with no prompts and no particular help, then either the task may well be too easy for the student, and because the student already knows the content. What we want to be able to show in a portfolio entry is progress over time. So your baseline should be at less than or at or below 50%, and then collect at least 6 additional data points over time, each conducted on a different date. So here we have baseline plus 6. Okay, that's the minimum standard. Do's and don'ts, many of you are familiar with this. This chart has been around for a while. I guess if you're using a multiple choice format, you need to have the correct answer and 2 distractors, 3 possible answers. Now, if the question is a yes-no answer, true, false, cause or effect, that kind of thing, you're not going to have 3 possibilities. And so this would not apply. But, you know, otherwise, if you've got a multiple choice format, you need to have 3 possible answer options. If it's a bad day, choose a different day to do assessment. If you know it, you know, if a student walks in the morning, you know it's not going to be a good day, hopefully you'll have some other options on the time to collect data. Cueing or cluing is still somewhat of a problem. Make sure you don't color code your answers or how the student should respond. The student should make an independent response. So be careful about cueing or cluing. Also, record the responses accurately. If the student got none right, then record it as such. Don't score them as correct if they're not performed independently. This is really an important piece. If you have 2 or 3 data points and the student doesn't appear to be making any progress, then the suggestion is to evaluate. Do you need to change the task? Is the task too hard? Do you need to modify the task so that the student can make an independent and correct response? Okay, you know, tailor activities and worksheets to the needs of each student, especially if you're using paper-based evidence. One size does not fit all, and so be prepared to adapt and modify activities to meet your students' needs and to show or to allow them to make independent and correct responses that shows what they know and what they can do. Certainly score correctly. This is not a problem over time. What we're seeing is that, you know, if there's 6 possible responses, that the percentage scores are being recorded accurately. Don't round up or round down to the nearest 10. The other thing we're seeing is if you have 5 responses on a page, that's pretty easy to figure out the percentage. But if you have 7 responses on a page, then record it accurately. Use correct date and make sure that all of your work evidence matches the dates on the data sheet and vice versa. When we wind up with a mismatch, then we can't use a particular piece of work evidence to score. If the scorer can't find that piece of work evidence, the date that matches on the data collection chart, we can't score it. So make sure that your dates all match up. And submit evidence completed by the student. Okay, let's talk about student work evidence. This continues, unfortunately, to be a problem. And it's all about having an eye for detail, and it really is, this is where the teacher being aware of what's on the student work evidence becomes so very important. The student's name, first and last name, must be present on each piece of student work evidence. If the student can only write his or her first name, then you can write their last name, okay? It just has to be there. It doesn't matter who writes it, it has to be there. Same thing with the date. If the student can put the month and the day but doesn't necessarily put the year, teacher can fill that in. Certainly you want to encourage your students to participate as actively as possible in these activities, not just in the activity, but in filling out a paper-based work sample, and primarily that's what we see. The targeted skill must be written somewhere on that data chart, or I'm sorry, not the data chart, on the student work evidence. It can be at the top of the page, it can be at the bottom of the page, it can be right before the directions line if there is a directions line, but it must be stated. This is a problem many pieces of work samples that come through scoring don't have the targeted skill written on them. We can't use that sheet in scoring. So if you submit, say you submit 7, and 3 of them are missing the targeted skill on the work sample, now you only have 4 scorable pieces of work evidence, and the minimum requirement is 6. It's not that you didn't submit enough, it's that they're not scorable because they're missing some critical features. Okay, so don't get confused and say, well, I turned in 7 sheets, why did this get a condition code? It's because the sheets that were submitted were not able to be scored. Okay, the alphanumeric code for the standard must be on student work evidence, and a score representing the student's performance of this targeted skill expressed as a percentage must be on the work evidence, along with the student's work, along with the activity that was completed. But these are essential pieces. If they're missing, the score does not count that particular piece of work evidence. So that brings us to talking about condition codes. And, you know, the technical adequacy of the portfolio is as important as the student's quality of work and their effort. You know, and this is a perfect example. If these things are missing, it could be exemplary student work, but it won't be scored. So, and even having 1 of 3 required entries receive a condition code during scoring has a significant and adverse effect on the proficiency rating for science. So if you get a condition code, say of CD, which is problems with the data chart, the entire entry scores 1 for performance, 1 for complexity, 1 for supports, and the overall proficiency rating for science will likely be basic or below basic, regardless of the quality of the work. For 2015, these are the number of portfolios and entries receiving condition codes. At 5th grade level, there were 60 portfolios that were submitted. So 60 times 3 entries for each portfolio made 180, of 180 possible entries. 84 of those 180 possible entries received a condition code. So almost half of the entries got a condition code. Okay, if you think back on the numbers of, I'm going to scroll back really quick here. Fortunately, here it's at the start. This is where all these are, this is why there are so many below basic portfolios, because many of these got condition codes. And when you score 1 for performance, complexity, and supports, and you wind up with 3 points out of a possible, the total number of points that you can get in scoring on any one entry is 50 points, and you get 3 out of 50, well, guess what? No matter what quality work the student has submitted, it's at below basic. And it's sometimes as simple as leaving one of these things off of 2 or 3 student worksheets. So be careful. One of the things I can't suggest to you strongly enough is get somebody else to look at your portfolio before you prepare it for submission. A colleague, a supervisor, someone who is knowledgeable about portfolios, and ask them just to take a look. You know, I can't tell you how many times I look at even these materials that I present, and I can always find one more typo, or I can find one more thing, oops, I should have put a comma there or something. And it's because we look at these things so much, we just don't even see the errors when they appear. So get somebody else to look at your students' work to make sure that all the technical aspects of the portfolio are correct. So students do really good work. For 8th grade, there were 57 portfolios, 171 total entries, only 56 out of 171 received condition codes, about 40%. It's still an awfully high percentage. And for biology, 72% of entries received condition codes. I also think that this is why there were fewer advanced portfolios this year, because so many received condition codes. And primarily the condition codes are CD, which are problems with the data collection sheet, or CF, which are problems with the work samples. So here's a list of code descriptions. Things that are going better, there are way fewer N3 or N4 condition codes. These N codes are really disastrous because they just scored 0 for the whole entry. So here is where the data sheet, there's no name or date on the data chart or the student work would receive, that entry would receive an N3 code. Particularly in the area of the entry cover sheets, these are coming out much, much better, and people are filling in all the information on the entry cover sheet, which would receive an N4 condition code. Now what you'll notice, and this is kind of interesting because this past year we had an increase in the number of condition codes CB, where the wrong performance dimension was chosen. Now, if a CB code is assigned to a portfolio, performance gets a score of 1, complexity is scored normally, and support is scored normally. But this has a significant impact on the total score for the entry. What I'd like to do is show you this performance dimension determination and how this relates to the learner characteristics profile and what needs to be on there to make this make sense. And so let me start here. So performance dimension, as you know, there are 2 different ways to score performance. One is by attainment and one is by progress. 99% of kids are going to be using the attainment model. The progress dimension, or progress model, is primarily for our most severely, significantly, profoundly impaired kids who do not have a reliable communication system. If your student is a verbal communicator, has some writing skills, can sign, use Braille, an OGCOM system to communicate, or if your student uses intentional communication like gestures, or pointing, or pictures, or any of these kinds of modes, but does it reliably. Reliability is the key here. You know what the student is telling you because they expressively communicate consistently. So when the student points to an item or points to an answer, you know that is what they mean. Okay? So if you answer yes to either of these questions on the performance dimension determination form, then the student will be scored for performance on the attainment model. If the student communicates primarily through cries, facial expressions, changes in muscle tone, but no clear use of objects or textures or gestures or pictures, or if the student alerts to sensory input but requires physical assistance to follow simple directions or response to sensory stimuli, if you respond yes here, then the student's performance will be scored against the progress dimension or the progress model, okay? So, and you need to have this form filled out by January 15th. This date on this form is incorrect. Should say January 15th, 2016. So just take note of that. But the form itself is accurate. Okay, so you're thinking, so why is this important? All right. This is important because Sorry, let me back up here a bit. I'm going too fast. Okay. Because on the learner characteristics profile, you need to make a decision and check one of these boxes. Either the student is attainment or the student is progress, based on how you respond, how the committee responds here. And this could be an IEP team decision, not just a teacher decision. This box must be filled out. If you fill out both or you fill out none, the assumption will be made by the scores that the student will use the attainment model. And again, 99% of kids are probably attainment model kids. One of these boxes should be checked. If you check the wrong one, that's where you see this code. What primarily happens is kids that should be scored against the attainment performance model, the box here is checked progress. Another way that scores check for consistency, and that you can check for consistency also, is look at item number 6 and item number 8 on the learner characteristics profile. If you check the box that says uses symbolic language to communicate or uses intentional communication but not at a symbolic language level, if you check one of these two boxes, you should not be checking progress up here. These are attainment model students. And so a scorer will say, oh, okay, this is a progress student based on the response here. But then they say, oh, but the student uses symbolic language to communicate, can read basic sight words, has some basic writing skills, and can do math with a calculator. They are not a progress dimension student, which is these students here. Okay. The other place that we also look is receptive language. If the student can independently follow 1 to 2 step directions, if they can follow directions with some additional cues, then they're attainment level kids. They're attainment model kids. Students that alert to sensory input but require physical assistance to follow directions, give uncertain responses to sensory stimuli, these may likely be progress model kids, but this is not a sure thing. Again, that the committee needs to decide. Where this comes from is a reliable communication system. Our progress model kiddos are the kids that sometimes we're not sure how they're responding. Okay? Again, these are our most significantly challenged kids that participate in the DC Science Vault. And there should be, again, a very small percentage of these kids. So be careful how you mark this and make sure it's consistent with what's here, and certainly make sure that it's an accurate representation of what the student knows and can do. What's their vision like, their hearing, their motor skills, and it asks here, what are the students' academic skills currently? Can they read fluently? Can they read sight words? Or is there no observable awareness of print or braille? Okay, if your student can't interact with print, it is likely that they need to be at the attainment model level for performance. Same thing with math or with writing skills. Okay, I think I've probably beaten that to death, so I'm going to move on. But this was a problem this year, not a huge problem, but we've never seen this before. Typically, that would be one that we would say was not a significant issue. Okay, and then we're back here with CD and CF, and these are the two biggies. No data chart, not enough data on the data chart, there's incomplete information on the data chart. And then CF, the percentage scores aren't recorded, the scores and dates don't match the data chart. There's no alphanumeric code, there's no targeted skill listed, and here's what you get, are ones, and it just, your proficiency rating just goes to the basement. Okay, so here's a couple of things that were problematic. For those of you who administered portfolios last year, the last date to collect data was March the 6th, 2015. So if I'm a scorer, I look here and I say, okay, we have the student's name, here's the alphanumeric code, here's the targeted skill, here are the steps for the trials, here's the performance, expressed as a percentage, here's the key. Boy, this is all looking pretty good. We have a baseline plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 data events. Okay, all of those minimum standards appear to have been met, so I look again, and wow, this data was collected on the 9th. So the cutoff date was the 6th. No more data can be collected and used for data collection purposes after March 6, 2015. And here we have the 9th, and here we have the 10th. So I can't use these two data columns as a scorer. So now I go back and count. Now I have baseline plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I can't use this entry. Okay, it seems trivial. It might seem picky and that kind of thing, but everyone is held to the same standard. So I can't say, oh man, this portfolio looks really good. I'll count these because I'm a good person and I want to see the student do his best. And we do want to see students do their best. There's a lot of work that goes into these portfolios. But, okay, so here for 2015, here was the rule. No data collection after the 6th of March. And everyone and all portfolios are held to that standard. So we can't count these. Student scores a 1 for performance, complexity, and supports for this entire entry. Okay, here's another example of a data chart that's problematic. Here you have a baseline. Well, you've got that student name, you've got the standard code, you've got the targeted skill, you've got your key, you've got your percentage scores. You have a baseline plus 4. Again, the minimum standard is a baseline plus 6. So we can't use the entry for scoring. Student scores a 1 for performance, complexity, and supports. So make sure that what you have and what you're responsible for checking for is technically adequate. Make sure you've crossed the T's and dotted the I's and you have all the information present that needs to be there. All of this is laid out in the Procedures Handbook. If you have any questions, go to the Procedures Handbook. Okay, this entry received a condition code of CF, problems with the work samples. Okay, so if I look at that, we have the student's name, we have the date, month, day, and year. Here is the standard code. On this one, the standard itself is included on the student work sample. There's a direction line, fill in the missing steps of the scientific method, cut and paste in the correct order. There is a percentage correct, and here is the student work. This particular piece of work evidence cannot be used because the targeted skill is not listed here. The standard is, but the targeted skill is not, and the directions are specific that the targeted skill must appear on all student work samples. Just having the directions is great, but it's not the targeted skill. So again, cross your T's and dot your I's. So this particular work sample couldn't be scored. Okay, these last condition codes, we don't see them very often. Of this CI, student work is not aligned to the targeted skill strand or to the standard. This is where you've got a misalignment almost all student work is aligned. We see a few, but again, I didn't highlight this because we didn't see enough to say, boy, this was significant. Missing activity description sheet. When you don't include the activity description sheet, performance can be scored, complexity can be scored, but supports will receive a score of 1. And baseline over 50%, we saw a few of these, not very many. Of all of the possible entries that were reviewed, saw maybe 4 or 5. So again, I wouldn't consider this to be a significant problem, but look what happens. Performance scores a 1. We can score complexity and score support, but performance is a 1 if the baseline is over 50%. So make sure that the technical aspects of the portfolio, that all of those requirements have been met. And I think that what we will see are significantly fewer numbers of entries with condition codes. Okay, most of these, the lion's share of these, I don't have an exact number for you, but certainly, you know, I would say 70% or more of these were CD, problems with the data collection sheet, or CF, condition codes, problems with the work samples themselves, and it rendered scores of 1 for that entry in either of those CD or CF cases. So again, make sure that the technical pieces are put together properly. Okay, successes and continuing challenges. The entry cover sheets were filled out completely incorrectly. We saw very few codes N4 over previous years. You know, missing or incorrect information on the data charts, CD, and the student work evidence, code CF, continue to have a significant adverse impact on student proficiency ratings. And if you're not sure how to record this stuff, ask someone, ask a colleague, ask your building or your LEA folks. If there's an LEA DC Science Alt coordinator in your district, ask them. Also, OSSI can be used as a resource. So there's plenty of people to ask if you're not sure. Also, again, I can't recommend more highly. Have someone else look at these before they have to be turned in to see if somebody else can pick up a mistake. There is also a checklist in the procedures handbook, I believe Appendix B, where you can check off. Do you have this? Do you have, you know, is the data sheet filled out? Are there 6 pieces of student work evidence? Take a look at that and see if it might be useful to you. It is just for teacher use only. It does not have to be included in the portfolio, but it's just something for you to use. Okay, the only change for 2015, 2016, in 2014, 2015, there was a rule that said there must be at least 2 days between data collection for different strands. So if you had an 8th grade student and you collected your data for matter and reactions, then you needed to wait at least 2 school days before you started collecting data on forces or on life science. And there needed to be at least 2 days between them. That rule has been disconnected. They're discontinued. You can collect data consecutively. You can collect data concurrently. It's not an issue anymore. So just to collect your data, you just need a baseline plus 6 to 8 pieces of student work evidence documented in the portfolio. The dates don't matter as long as you don't collect data twice on the same day for the same strand. Okay, again, just a review of the important dates. Student data must be entered into SEDS by December 8th, by December 15th. the learner characteristics profile, the participation determination form, and the parent acknowledgement form must be completed and the parent acknowledgement form sent out. These dates will be announced by OSSE. When the assessment window closes will be announced sometime in January, so right after the first of the year. You are certainly free to get started right now if you haven't started already, but there will be a cutoff date. And make sure you don't collect data after the cutoff date and include in the portfolio. You can certainly collect data, but don't include it in the portfolio because it won't be scored. And then sometime after the first of the year, the portfolio submission instructions will be made available and return shipping packets will be received in the schools. So these are the upcoming important dates. If you need more information, contact your building DC Science Alt Coordinator or your LEA DC Science Alt Coordinator, or an OSSE contact is Nikki Stewart. And here is Nikki's email. You feel free to contact her if you have any questions or concerns about how the portfolio is developed for science this year. Okay, any questions? I think our time is just about up. It must be getting dark in DC by this time. And I know you are all anxious to get home. So if you have any questions, why don't you pose them now via the chat feature, or Bruce, how would you like to do that?
Yeah, if you have any questions, go ahead and submit them via the chat window. If we don't get responses to you yet today before we close out the session, if you want to provide your email address, we can also do a follow-up via the email. So I guess unless there's more questions, we'll give you a few more minutes to submit those.
I want to thank you all for your kind attention and wish you the best of luck with your science alternate portfolio this year.
Okay, and it does not appear that we have any additional questions coming in at this time. After the session is closed, if you have any questions, please contact your local test coordinator at the building level or your LEA coordinator, or you can go direct with Nikki Stewart at the Office of State Superintendent of Education. Her information is shown here on the last slide. Again, on behalf of Pearson, myself, and Carol Dyer, we thank you for participating in this afternoon's training. So with that, we will go ahead and conclude today's session. Thank you.